Evening again, folks. Old Buster coming to you. Oh, I believe we kind of got shut off there a bit on the last story about them old Fernie hole boys. But like I say, I always tell you all to have a blessed day when I sign off, and I dearly do mean that. Good Lord's good to us. We all have blessings. Well, we got another old story about the triplets. Title of this story is Them There Hills. It's going to take a bit to read it, but we'll get her done. Festus, Fergus, and Farrell Funny Hole. Them Fernie hole boys, the triplets, along with their cousins, Fur Knuckle and Carbuncle Jones, headed on up to Buster's place on Tipton Ridge. Whilst on the way, they done met up with Buster down in Tipton Holler down by the creek catching up crawdads. Now Festus hollered out at Buster to hold on up there, and all of them sat down on a log across the creek for a powwow. They done met up with Buster down in Tipton Holler down by the creek catching them crawdads and needed to visit with the boy a spell because they had something to chew on. Well, Fergus hollered out at Buster and of course told him to hold on up and sit down on that log a while. They needed to get a little drink of that pure spring water before they got ready for the tale. Well, Festus told Buster that they wanted Buster to show Jesse this here doodad they done found up in the hills off of the old Cherokee Trail. Now, Fur Knuckle was about to be bit by a copperhead snake, and Carbuncle grabbed a hold of him and pulled him away before he got bit. Well, that sort of riled Fur Knuckle, and he went to whack at their old copperhead with a stick, but he went in under a rock. Whoo-wee, don't you know that ain't something? Who's going to chase a copperhead under a rock? Well, Fur Knuckle would. When Fur Knuckle swung the stick at that there snake, he knocked the rock loose. Well, to make a long story short, Fur Knuckle pried that there rock out and killed the copperhead for short. There was an opening of sorts, and he called for Festus. Always something them boys is into, I'm telling you. Well, Fergus and Farrell come on over, and they had a gander at it all. They all said what the heck and decided to dig in the hole a mite, and they come up with all sorts of things and doodads and whatnot. They come up with porcupine quills and beads they never seen the like of, burnt pieces of old fires, some bones, little uns and big uns, old papers, and this here doodad. Well, Fur Knuckle handed it over to Buster and asked him if he wouldn't show it to Jesse and see if he could figure out if it's worth a nickel or not. Buster said it was sure enough unusual like, and he would get it on over to Jesse's place after he done ate a bite. He would let him know just what all it was and if it was worth anything, and they could do what they wanted to after that. Well, they thanked Buster and said they was looking forwards to hearing from him soon, and they was going to go on back and dig up some more tomorrow. If they found anything, they'd come and tell Buster. Well, after Buster done had him a bite of dinner, he lit out for Jesse's place. Whilst he was on his way, he seed Hired a-toting a tow sack. Well, what you got there, Hired? Buster exclaimed. Well, I got me some ground rattlers and a diamondback and 2 little timber rattlers. What in the world are you going to do with them? Said Buster. Well, when a feller come over to the schoolhouse, he said he knowed a feller up at the university that wanted them for some kind of experiment. Said he'd pay 6 bits of snake if anybody could catch up with some for him. Said he'd pay $5 for a diamondback and $2 for timber rattlers. Figured we could use a buck or 2 for Saturday night with the gals. Your jalopy gonna make it to the Razorback Drive-In in Little Rock? Well, I reckon it will. Grandpa done looked it over himself, took it over to Loomis Burke's DX, said it was good to go. I got this here darn doodad that the Fernie hole triplets and the Jones brothers done found, and they wanted me to take it over to Jesse to see what it was all about, what they had to allow. Well, let me put my snakes in the spring house and I'll go with you, said Hired. You're on the way, but I ain't going to be around them snakes. I just don't cotton to the ugly things. The Bible says to bruise their hide, and that's just what I would do if they come around me. Well, I just went to laughing and done some funning with Buster, swinging them snakes round about his and Hade. Get 'em loose from here, I'll sure enough skunk your Hade now, Hired. All right, let's go, but you can't catch me, Buster. I'm a mite faster than you big lug. Maybe I can't on the get-go, but I'll sure enough outlast you, said Buster. Reckon Jesse has done his hoeing with his small garden? Well, she sure is right particular about her garden, you know, said Hired. Well, if and he ain't, we can help out a bit so we can get on down to business, said Buster. When Buster and Hired showed up at Jesse's place, he was on his last corn row. Well, Jesse hollered out that he was about done and going up on the porch. Well, Jesse put up his hoe, and so I fought on over to the porch and sit on down. What y'all up to, said Jesse. Well, Buster commenced to tell Jesse what all the Fernie Hoe triplets and the Jones brothers done found and showed him the doodad. Well, this is quite now interesting, boys. Let's head on over to the library and do some digging of our own, said Jesse. Well, the boys went on over to the library and asked Miss Nix, who volunteered as librarian, if and she had a notion of what to look for. Now, Miss Nix was also the librarian at the high school, so she knowed about lots of stuff. Well, Buster showed her the doodad, which she called a medallion, and told them where to begin to look for information. The boys all got to looking over Jesse's shoulder whilst he was reading up on the medallion and the insignia that was on it. Well, Miss Nix had some time, so she began to help too. She said she figured on it might be a German, but couldn't bank on that there yet. Well, she made a phone call on the party line and then told the boys to head on over to see a feller she knowed that might know firsthand what the medallion was. The feller was Mr. Schmidt. He was an immigrant artist originally from Germany, but a machinist there in town. He was born in 1883 and didn't come to America till later on in life. He was one of them starving artists, so he had to make a living as a machinist, which he was right good at. Later on, he come to be well known and a respected artist in his own right. Well, the boys sashayed on over to Mr. Schmidt's place, and he welcomed them on in and asked if they wanted something to eat, being hospital and neighborly and all. Well, right off, Buster told him he surely did. He's caved in. Well, Miss Schmidt done brung the boys all manner of snacks and a pitcher of lemonade whilst the boys told the story of the medallion. Well, Mr. Schmidt reckoned he also thought the medallion was German, but he didn't rightly know that for sure, but he had an old book his grandpappy give him, and he remembered something like the picture on the medallion was in it. Well, Mr. Schmidt had a time to translate what all was written in the book because it was all in German. Come to find out, the medallion was from the secret order of the medallion, and it was Prussian and was a medallion of the Teutonic Knights. The onlyest picture was the picture on the medallion and not of the medallion itself. The words telling about it was from handwritten notes from Mr. Schmidt's grandpappy on the sides of the pages. Now, Mr. Schmidt also thought it was right interesting to find the medallion in the hole in the mountains of Arkansas and on the Cherokee Trail of Tears. He said the truth was stranger than fiction and glad he could help out some, but that was all he could do and all he could tell us about that there medallion. He was scratching his head when he done that. The boys headed on back to the library and told Miss Nix what all they had found out. She directed them to several books on the Cherokee Trail of Tears and the Teutonic Knights and the Prussians. Prussians. Well, Jesse told Buster and Hired that was going to take some time reading up on these here different folks, and they each needed to take a book and get together when one was done reading their book. Well, Jesse took a book on the Prussians. Buster took one on the Cherokee Trail of Tears, and Hired one on the Teutonic Knights. So they was checked out by Ms. Nix for 2 weeks. Well, the boys all agreed to be done in 2 weeks, and they'd meet up again on Saturday in 2 weeks' time at the library. Well, the boys seed Walter coming out the feed store and told him what all was going on, and he said he was surely up for an adventure, but had to finish up on out the ranch before he could take some time off other than school. They was a cutting calves and dipping and worming too this time of year, but he would be done in 2 weeks' time. Walter said he would meet up with them at the library in 2 weeks on that there Saturday. Well, Buster and Hired and Jesse headed on out to the Fernie Hoe place and gathered up Furnuckle and Carbuncle on the way. Now, Miss Fernie Hoe had made 3 fresh apple pies and offered up some to the boys along with fresh cold milk from this morning's milking that had been cooled down in their spring house. Well, Jesse explained what they done found out and told them all they was getting their reading done before they had any answers. He also reckoned, along with Buster and Thar, they would have to do some more investigating in that there hole what they found the medallion in. And they all decided to meet up after chores Friday evening and camp out there at the hole and dig some more. They all was to bring something to eat and picks and shovels and such. Now all the boys' folks didn't think too much of what all the boys was a-doing and knowed where they would be, so they wasn't worried nothing about them. Howard said he would let Walter know and see if he could make it to camp out or just come for a spell over the weekend. They needed his help. Well, Friday after school, the boys all headed on up to the hole in the mountain, but all their ma's told them to be back for church on Sunday morning and to get cleaned up for the services. All the boys said they would and lit on out. When they got there, Furnuckle and Carbuncle and Fergus and Festus and Furl said they had something to say. Now Fergus said they had all chewed the rag over all this medallion stuff and didn't rightly know what all they might find in the hole, but they had all decided that they wanted to split everything equal like if they got any money out of this here deal. Well, all the boys said they dearly appreciated the offer, but was glad to help and would just wait and see what all become of it before making a split. Furnuckle said he and the rest of the boys knowed Buster and y'all to be fair and would abide by what they said. Now all the boys spit in their hand and shook on it and then went back to work digging in the hole. There was easy enough digging except in this one big rock that was making it hard to get on back in the hole. Well, Buster asked Walter if and when he come back up there tomorrow, would he bring his team of mules that would pull that big rock out the way. They would keep on digging around it to make it a little bit easier to move till he got back. Well, that evening, after Walter left on out, Buster told them all he done found out about the Cherokee Trail of Tears. They sure enough moved the Cherokees through Arkansas there, and with stories of silver and other treasure hid out along the way in these here hills, but nobody's ever found it. There was some said to be found down Georgia way, though. Now Buster commenced to telling and reading some about what all he found out of them books out there at the library. Well now, said Carbuncle, that sure enough is quite a load to get your mind round. Take a body nigh on a month to cipher on it. Boys, y'all all know there's stories about the Cherokee treasure buried in these here parts. Just might be true, you know. Y'all done found this here medallion. Ain't no telling what's back in that there hole. Only time will tell, said Jesse. Only time will tell. Well, Walter come on back up with his team of mules about mid-morning after his chores was done. All the boys had cleared out real good around that there big old rock, so she was about ready to rope. Walter put Honda, which is a breakaway, on a rope where the mules was going to pull from. If that rock got out of hand, the rope would break away and not roll over the team because they would be getting out the way. The big old rock was a doozy for sure. The mules pulled down to their haunches, but they got her done, I tell you. That rock rolled out about 12 foot from the entrance to the hole so the boys could get back on in there for a good piece. And a gander. The boys went to digging and clearing out the entrance, but come to a spot where the hole was to begin to slope down. It was sure enough dark in that hole, so the boys decided to get some lanterns and rope and come back after church the next morning. There was water and graves near about, so the boys were going to bring back a saddle horse, plow horse, and a mule. That night, Thar done read up on the Teutonic Knights and figured he would tell the rest of the boys all about them fellers. This is what he found out about them. And he began to tell them what all was in the book. "Woo-wee," exclaimed Festus. "That there is sure enough a lot for a feller to swallow, I tell you. This is sure getting us more than we bargained for, ain't it, boys?" Whilst looking at Fergus, Carbuncle, and Furnuckle. They all nodded their heads, and all of them began to telling Buster, Jesse, and Howard if it weren't for them, they just might figure on leaving all this alone. Well, Buster said, "Now, boys, we has done been in a mess and a pickle before and can surely get out of this. We is all together, and we know some folks that and kin that could help us out if it need be. Y'all just stay stout, and we will come out of this all right. Since we is in it, we has just got to see it to the end. Well, Carbuncle and Furnuckle spoke up and said not to ask them to do no reading. School is bad enough. All the rest of the boys belly laughed at that, I tell you. Well, after church, the boys decided to rest up a bit and not to go back to the hold till that evening, but wait till Friday and be better prepared. Jesse said they'd have to go back to the library and give all their books back that they was lent by Ms. Nix. By Friday, he would have his reading done about them Prussians, and Ms. Nix might have some more information about the medallion. They all agreed and said they plumb near forgot that tomorrow was Mother's Day and they needed to pick some flowers for their maws. We'll do just that, said Buster. I know where some buttercups and wild roses are, and my ma and grandma dearly love them hydrangeas. Miss Margie down by Miller Creek has some she'd let us have. I'm going to get some honeysuckle too, said Festus. When Ma is done smelling up, I'll suck the sweetness right out of them flowers, just like a honeybee. They is a-growing on the fence row over by Iron Barn. Well, Buster hollered he was going to put on the feed bag. Tomorrow will be a feast. Well, all the boys had a whale of a Sunday, and all the maws was a-beaming with the flowers the boys brung them. Seemed like all the boys' folks wanted to hear the latest on their escapades. So all the folks got together after church and decided they'd have coffee and pie on the back porch of Hired's house, as well as the leftovers from their dinner. Now that was a feast fitting for a king, Buster bellered. Dinner was special, but supper was all manner of good eating. Big Jim, Hired's pa, started off the conversation about what the boys was a-doing. Dubs, Walter's pa, said he went to looking for his and tame mules, and Walter's sister, Mary Gale, said Walter done took 'em. Well, Buster's grandpa Gus wondered where all his and shovels and picks was too whilst he's looking for Buster. Well, Mr. McBrayer said he done heard from Mr. Hiram Nix over at the tire shop whilst getting the flat fixed that Ms. Nix was helping the boys figure out all about some medallion that the Fernie Hole triplets and Jones brothers done dug up. She said she sent him on over to talk to Mr. Smith since he come from Germany. She'd called some folks at the university and a friend at the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. after talking to Pete. That's Pete Schmidt, that is. By the way, Clara, that's Buster's grandma, Miss Smith said the boy of yourn surely had an appetite. She sent him home a-packing some schnitzels for all of y'all and wondered if y'all liked them since she didn't hear from you. Well, everybody turned and looked at Buster, and just Buster bowed his and head as sheepish looking and fessed up he done ate 'em all. You will call over to Miss Schmidt tomorrow and tell her what you done, Buster, said Gus. That's Buster's grandpa. Yes, sir, Buster said. Well, Clara spoke up and she said, looking at all the other women in that group, that any one of them could testify to Buster's holler leg. Everybody laughed at that statement for sure. And Buster spoke up and said he was sorry, but he done got hungry, and them schnitzels sure made his mouth water. They was really good, too. Well, Big Jim and the families listened to what all the boys had read up on and what they was a-doing there and where. He said to be careful and keep 'em all informed what all was a-happening out there at the hole. We been to the mill with you boys, and it just ain't no telling what you all boys will get into. About that time, Jesse's sisters, Diane and Sandy, and Walter's sisters brung out the coffee and pie and said there was other food on the table and to help theirselves if they wanted some. Now, Ms. Holmes asked the gal to lend a hand of serving since all the folks was going to listen to what all the boys had to say, you know. Well, the next Friday, all the boys met up over to Jesse's house and went into the barn and sit on the hay bales while Jesse explained to them about them there Prussians. Well, now, it's what he got to tell them everything about it. Well, after all that confabbing and whatnot, and their gabbing about things, the boys sure didn't know about nor cotton to. The Fernie Hole twins, the Jones brothers, was plumb hornswoggle. I tell you, Lordy mercy, we ain't never heard of such in our born days, says Festus. Boys, if y'all can't figure out this mumbo-jumbo, we's gonna skedaddle. What all we done got ourselves into, Buster said Furnuckle. Well, Furnuckle, says Buster, honest Injun, I don't rightly know, but I for one ain't a-quitting on this here puzzle. I can speak for Hired, Walter, and sure enough Jesse that we are in it till the end. I've knowed all you boys since you was knee-high to a grasshopper, and you never knowed none of you, nor none of your people, to run from a fight. But Buster, this here ain't nobody to tussle. We don't know a darn thing about them knights and Prussians and such, and from Adam's all fox. Walter spoke up and said, well, it ain't like them fellers is alive, is it? If and they was, we'd be on 'em like a cuckleburr under old Dan's saddle blanket now, wouldn't we? Well, sure we would, said Carbuncle, with Festus and Fergus nodding their heads in agreement. Ain't no ghost neither, so don't go there neither, said Walter. Well, all right. Y'all gonna stick or run, said Howard. We'll stick, but y'all gotta stay with us now, said Fergus. Well, Jesse stood up and told him he was going to get to the bottom of all this yet, and it ain't about the money neither, so let's get on at it and get her done. Well, they all went to the library and give back the books to Mrs. Nix, and she said they done right good of looking up everything. The folks at the university was sending a feller or two down from Fayetteville to talk with them, and the feller she knowed in Washington was going to be a-talking to some folks he knowed too, so expect some visitors. She said y'all going about your digging and such, and that she had spoke to all the maws and paws, and they tweren't none worried a bit, but scared about what they had found. Just be careful in the hole. The boys left on out and gathered up their ropes, lanterns, and other tools with the horses and mule, and after setting up camp and all, the boys got a good night's sleep and was up bright and early. Buster had the Dutch oven over the fire, and Jesse had the coffee pot a-boiling. Hire done had the mule hitched to pull if and they needed him. The Ferny Hole triplets and Jones brothers was noted to sleep in, but Walter rolled them out with a douse of cold water from the spring just a laughing. Come and get it, Sleepy Hayes, you're burning daylight, he hollered. The opening in the hole got bigger and bigger with each shovelful they dug. Festus was in the hole when he began to holler. Buster pulled him on out and was quizzing him to what was the matter. There's some kind of drop-off, it looks like. A ladder going down, said Festus. Well, Festus, only's one thing to do about it, said Howard. I'm a-going in. Give me a lantern and a rope, Jesse said. Well, after Howard was all gussied up, he crawled in the hole and got the ladder and shined the light down into the bottom. Well, Howard started down the ladder, testing each rung with his weight. It was rock solid, excuse the pun, and he went on down to the bottom. The lantern showed it was a cave and a big one to boot. Well, Howard left the lantern down in the cave and hightailed it in on back outside. Boys, you got to do some more digging to widen out that entrance in the hole to get everybody through it, and equipment, and in and out with the treasure. What you mean, said Buster. Boys, there just ain't no telling how much stuff is in that there cave. I declare it's a boatload. Well, the Ferny Hole triplets and Jones brothers began to a-dancing, a-jig, and a-hooping and a-hollering. Now it's going to take a heap of work and time, but we can get it out. Well, Jesse said to hold on for a minute now. We need to think about all this for a spell. First off, if and everybody knows we found treasure, they going to flock to us like skeeters at nightfall. We also got to plan where to put it all. Well, Mr. Lewis over to the bank ought to be talked to with iron paws. Now, if and it's all Howard says it is, we're all agreed to equal share. Is that right? Asked Jesse. All the boys agreed and shook hands again. The other thing is we can't tell nobody except our paws and Mr. Lewis. They can decide to talk to the high sheriff or not. Every robber in 4 states will be on us like fleas on a dog's back to take it from us, boys. Well, Festus spoke up and said, we is all crack shots and would wrestle a bobcat. I know that, said Jesse, but if they catch us alone or have a gang, we'll be sunk for sure. Loose lips sink ships, you know. Boys, let's get the opening bigger and get a gander down in there with what all we're dealing with first off. Then we can see about covering up our tracks here at the opening. Well, all of them went right at it, and Buster stopped and told everybody to hold up for a minute. Buster said to Festus, Fergus, Furl, Furnuckle, and Carbuncle, thank y'all, boys, for trusting in me and the boys and cutting us in. Grandpa says never do business with a man who don't say thank you. Either he thinks you owe him or he owes you. Both sets of brothers come to Buster with smiles and tears and said if it weren't for him, they wouldn't be here nohow. Well, Buster asked who had the medallion. Jesse said he did. Well, I got an ID, he said. I think Hired ought to take the medallion and put it in a safe place. Now just where is that, Buster? Asked Walter. Well, Hired has a way with critters, you know. And he has a tow sack full of rattlers in his spring house. I think Hired ought to put the medallion in with them rattlers, them snakes. Ain't nobody gonna get in there, I tell you. Well, all the boys just hooped over that ID and said, get her done. This evening, let's all of us go to Hired's and then over to my place and spend the night. We can talk to our paws, then get Grandma to fix us some supper, said Buster. Them boys was a whirling dervishes widening that there opening. When they got her done and everybody clammed down the ladder and seed what all was there, their eyes popped out like they'd been poleaxed. The room was plumb full of silver and gold galore with other treasure. The Cherokees had left a book like a diary out on a shelf of rock, and Jesse found it and began to reading that, whilst the rest of the boys began to tally up what all they done found. Mostly there was sacks of gold and silver and other objects of gold like come out of church. There was a shield and a sword leaned up against the rock wall by the book too. Gold and silver coins was in leather pouches too, as well as gold nuggets. Now Buster figured each sack to be round about 200 pounds. That's about all a donkey could haul. There was 14 sacks of gold, 20 leather pouches of coins and nuggets, 19 sacks of silver, and 2 pouches of some kind of gemstones, plus the shield and sword and book. There was also another medallion and a cutout in the back of the book, but Jesse didn't tell nobody about that in there either, not just yet. Well, Jesse said for each one of the boys to get him a pouch and told Buster he was going to take the book and read up on it and see what all it said. Well, Walter took that there mule and plow horse and told Buster to help him hook them up. We was going to put the big rock back over the hole. You other boys get some brush and rub down our tracks round about the hole and cover it up a mite with some brush and leaves. Hired, you help me and Walter to get that rock in place, would you? Said Buster. Well, they got the rock back in place and put the fire out and gathered up their belongings and lit out to Hired's house. When the boys got to Hired's, Big Jim was just coming in. The boys waited on Hired to put the medallion in with the snakes and then went to Big Jim and told him what all they wanted to do this evening and asked him if he wouldn't make the calls to their paws and Mr. Lewis. Big Jim said he would first off, pardon me now, and called Gus, that's Buster's grandpa. He said it was important and all of them would be over in a bit after he called everybody. Now Hired's ma, Miss Shirley, said she would head on out to Buster's and help with supper and all. Well, all the ma's coming running to help with getting supper and the big meeting. None of the sisters and the brothers would be going because they had to take care of each of their places, plus this here was secret. Mr. Caleb Ferneyhole just come in from the sawmill when he got the message, and Mr. Silas Jones was doing chores after he come in from the field when he was called. Matilda was Mrs. Jones' name, and Ruth was Mrs. Ferneyhole's name. They all met up, and the women folk had some elderberry wine, and the men folk had old McBrayer whiskey for a snort, whilst the women folk set out supper. Once everything was about ready, the boys brung out their pouches and began to tell their tale. Well, Gus said you done right by calling in and covering up the entrance and hiding the medallion. I'm going to go call Mr. Seth Lewis right now and invite him on over. Mac, Jesse's pa, you know the sheriff real well. What you think about calling him? Said Dubs. Sure thing. I knowed Bud since we was in diapers. We ought to call him in on this. Dubs said that was a good idea. In about 15 minutes, the sheriff and Mr. Lewis rolled up in Mr. Lewis's car. The sheriff didn't want nobody to see his sheriff car and wonder what all was going on. Smart feller, said Big Jim. Well, all the folks sat down to supper and began to conversing about the treasure and what all was there and how much it might be worth. Well, first off, we need to get a wagon and team up there and some deputies to guard the treasure, getting it out and getting it to the bank. Next off, we need to see about the legal end of it all, and then see about this medallion business with all the fanfare around it. Cherokees, Prussians, and Brothers of the Sword is quite a mouthful. Might even be something federal involved, said the sheriff. The sheriff said he was going to talk to Ms. Nix and Mr. Schmidt and the folks they talked to and make some calls to the federal boys and get their opinion of what to do. Then he'd get back to them about what all he found out. In the meantime, he was going to set up getting out the treasure and getting it to the bank, and wanted all the boys and their paws there too. They all agreed, just let them know when. Well, Mr. Lewis said he and the sheriff would take their pouches and put them in the bank and account under all the boys' names. All the paws agreed to that, and before Mr. Lewis left on out, he give each boy 5 double eagles. No matter what he said, you got to be paid for your work, and left a laughing. The boys didn't rightly know what to think, but like good sons ought to do, they handed over their 5 double eagles to their paws. Seeing as how money was scarce like, their families needed it. Each one of their paws give one of the double eagles back to their boy and smiled and shook their hand like a man. Services was the next day, and church was inspiring for the boys. They all met up after services and made up to go to Leake's drugstore for some ice cream. Whilst a-talking, Buster allowed that they needed to do what the Bible said and give 10% to the church for tithes. They said they agreed and said they would talk to their maws about it when the time come. On the way home that evening, Festus, Fergus, and Furl was met out on the road to their house by 2 fellers. They said they wanted them to talk to them about the medallion. Fergus asked them who they was, and they said they was here to find out where it was and look at it. Festus up and says they don't know nothing about no medallion, and him and Furl turned to walk away. Well, both of them growed men would be a handful for Buster, and they jumped on all 3 of them boys to begin to whaling their tar out of them and telling them to tell about that there medallion. Well, Festus, Fergus, and Furl could all scrap, but them 2 fellers was just too much for them. One of them was a-hurting Festus pretty bag of harming him, when Festus bit his and feller and jumped on the back of the one that had Fergus down. Well, Furl commenced to pulling his and hair on the other. It was getting pretty sticky when old Ollie the mare come along with his and pack of dogs and sicked them on them 2 fellers. Well, they lit a shuck, I tell you. Well, Ollie got the boys up on his and horse and took them back to town to Doc Harris. Fergus had his and arm broke, and Festus had a loose tooth and a broke nose, and Furl had a goose egg on his and Hade and a couple of cracked ribs where the feller elbowed him some. Well, Doc Harris called the sheriff, and he called all the boys and their paws and maws. Well, Caleb Fernyhoe and Silas Jones come into town a breathing fire, I tell you. Both of them had their shotguns with them, too. The sheriff had a time of calming them men down. And when everybody settled down, the sheriff said this had gone for enough. Day after tomorrow is when they is going to get the treasure and get it to the bank. In the meantime, he had to do some more investigating and was going to call in the state police for assistance. He told Caleb and Silas now to take it easy, that he would get them 2 fellers and make them pay. Well, Caleb said he'd better get them before he did. Ain't no grown man going to attack his and youngins. Silas expressed the same sentiment. The sheriff said he knowed all the men whose boys was involved, that they was sure enough innocent and they had a right to protect their families. But he would really appreciate it if they would let him do his job before they up and killed somebody. Well, we ain't going to go outside the law, said Caleb, but if they come back, fur is going to fly. But all us pals feel the same way about our boys, but you got to do something about these here thugs. We realize there's more here than meets the eye, and we probably need some help on this, but we ain't going to stand by and see our families and youngins hurt. Are we clear on that? I agree, and I do the same, but please give me a chance to put this all to bed. I'm asking for your word. You have it, but don't let 'em come to our homes, bud, warned Big Jim, with Gus a second in that. I done been in one war, bud, and you know me well. If they come after Buster, they won't leave standing up, said Gus. Well, Dubs told Bud that he had a whole passel of the family, and if they hurt one of them, theirs was one of theirs, they would rain fire and brimstone on them no matter who they was. When Bud see the doc after all the men folks and boys had left on out, he told Doc Harris he would surely pity the man that got on the wrong side of them men. And them two thugs that hurt the Fernie old boys would rue the day they was born before this was over. Well, the sheriff was deep into seeing who knowed about this here medallion when he got a call from the FBI in Washington. The special agent in charge said for him to be on the lookout for some fellers from Germany that was associated with the Illuminati, whatever that was. He says it was a secret arm of the group that done their assassinations. They was called the Brothers of the Sword. Well now, what a mess. Oh my Lord, said the sheriff. One of the boys in town been doing some reading up on them fellers about a medallion they done found. You gotta be careful, Sheriff. These fellers are real professionals and ain't to be trifled with. My advice, shoot first and ask questions later. Well, Buster and Jesse was coming from school when a feller come up to them and asked to speak to them. He showed them his identification from the university. They said Ms. Nick said he would come by. They talked a spell, and he said it sounded like the Brothers of the Sword medallion. They was aligned with the Teutonic Knights, and they split off later on to become an assassination for hire group. But the medallion had a very special meaning to them. The medallion was a rite of passage, and the leaders was handed down the medallion from one generation to generation. The type of medallion told what position they held. The feller said if and he could help in any way to call him, and he would dearly like to see the medallion, sometimes that they'd let him do it. Well, the boys was getting some eye-openers for sure. But Jesse said, how does all this come together with Cherokees and Prussians and Brothers of the Sword? As I see it, said Jesse, it's a no-brainer for the Teutonic Knights and the Prussians and the Brothers of the Sword to be tied all together. But the Cherokees has got me stumped. I think the answer's in the book I found in the cave. Well, ain't nobody been told, and we ain't going to tell nobody about the book nor the other medallion, is we, Jesse? Heck no, we ain't, said Buster. Too much is going on. Let's ride this out for a spell. Well, it wasn't long before it hit the fan, if you know what I mean. The next day they was supposed to move the treasure, so time was short. That evening, two thugs caught Furknuckle and Carbuncle coming from chores, picking up chunks in the new ground they was a-fixing to plow. Them thugs put a whooping on both the boys with broke ribs and a broke jaw plus cuts and bruises. They got out of them that Hired had the medallion. Well, Mr. Jones found the boys and brung them up to Doc Harris and called the sheriff. Bud met them at Doc's. Hired was a-piddling in the shop when they come up on him. Hired had him a pitchfork and given him what for and a fit when Buster and Jesse come up. Well, Walter had come to Hired's to borrow a single tree and got there whilst Hired was a-holding off the thugs. The fight was on, I'm a-telling you. Hired a-gouging at him with the pitchfork and Walter giving one feller a heck of a tussle. When Buster and Jesse got there, all hell broke loose, I tell you. First off, Jesse got knocked out. Buster hollered for Walter to get back to back with him and Hired to work his way to him and put his back to him. Well, the boys was a-holding their own till them fellers pulled them swords on them. Plumb whacked the pitchfork plumb in two with one swipe. One of the thugs whacked Walter upside the head with the flat side of the blade, knocking him to his knees. The other feller told Buster to hold still and quit a-fighting unless he wanted to see Hired split right down the middle and his head lopped off. Whew. The biggest of the two fellers said he was going to ask one time, and one time only, and they was all dead if they didn't tell. Where's the medallion? Well, Buster looked at Hired and told him to tell him. Hired said it was in the spring house in a tow sack. The feller had Hired go with him to the spring house, whilst the other feller kept Buster and Walter at bay. Jesse was just coming to when Hired returned with the tow sack. The feller with the sword a-holding Buster asked where the other'n was. Hired said he was back there doing something but to bring the sack with the medallion to you. The feller said to hand it over. Well, Hired throwed the tow sack to the feller, and when he went to catch it, all them rattlers come out madder'n a wet hen. They ate that man up, I tell you, bit him all over. He didn't last 30 seconds. He was deader than a doornail. What happened to the first one, asked Walter. Well, the snakes was kind of sluggish being in the cool of the spring house, but when that feller stuck his hand in the sack, every one of them bit him. They didn't make a sound till he put his hand in there. He didn't last long as this feller, and not a peep one out of him. Well, we better call the sheriff, said Jesse. Well, I'd run up to the house and had his and Ma call Bud. She told him to come on over, and she had to take the boys to Doc Harris's office. The boys elected to stay till Bud got there and then went on to the docks. When Bud got there, he said both them fellers was nothing but buzzard bait now and got what they deserved. Well, the rest of the story, as old Paul Harvey says on the radio. The next day, the sheriff and the boys and their pals and deputies got the treasure out and brung on out in a wagon with 4 draft horses a-pulling it. They went in the back alley to the bank, and Mr. Lewis met them and put the treasure in the vault, locked up tighter than a drum. The feller from the university was called, and he come back with 4 guards. The boys give over the medallion as a donation to the school. They later got a letter from the president of the university saying that each one of them had a full scholarship for whatever degrees they wanted. The book was donated for Mrs. Nix to the library till such time they didn't want it, and then it would be returned to the boys. What was in the book was the story of how the Brothers of the Sword come to be here. They come on a boat with Giovanni di Verrazzano in 1524 and was later killed by Indians. The Cherokee tribe knowed the 2 knights, and they taught each other many things. The Pope assigned the knights to guard the Catholic priests that accompanied the expedition. The priest and the knights stayed when Giovanni di Verrazzano left. After the knights died, the priest had kept account of all their travels and how they got here and such, and wrote it in the book. He stayed with the Indians till he passed. The Indians got a hold of the shield and sword and medallion and kept them as sacred tribal artifacts and passed them down through the ages. The medallions was the history of generations, and that was why they were so important to the Brothers of the Sword. It turned out the medallion was one that made the feller who had it the leader of a bunch of assassins. The medallions was pure gold covered with pewter. They didn't look like much on the outside, but it was the inside that counted. Inlaid in the gold was all manner of gems, diamonds, rubies, emeralds, and sapphires. The gold and other treasure brung each of the boys a right smart bit of money. The boys donated all the chalices and other silver and gold plates and crosses and such to the church, along with $35 million. The Cherokee Nation was give $35 million as well. The town was give $10 million for whatever they needed, plus air conditioning for the school. That left each of the boys around $31 million and change. The government decided the boys could keep the money but had to pay taxes, and the state and federal governments got their share for sure. Well, after taxes, each of the boys cleared somewhere around $20 million apiece. That paid off all the debts for their families and provided an education for all their brothers and sisters, along with new cars, trucks, farm equipment, houses, and vacations to boot. Wasn't a bad day's work for the pay, boys. Well, Jesse whispered to Buster, "Where are we going to hide that other medallion?" Buster answered, grinning. "Hired got a den full of rattlers spied out back of his house. Ain't no better hiding place, is there?" Thank y'all, folks. Have a blessed day. Old Buster will be coming to you later.